important that there is public policy support for arts, culture and the creative industries. And I think it's important for a whole range of reasons, for the individual, for the human spirit, but also for a sense of place, an identity of communities, and of course the economic argument again. One of the most interesting and surprising figures to me was how little people understood the connection between investment in the arts and culture and tourism. And I think one of the things that we haven't done enough of is actually tell people what public money actually does go into the arts and why. So I think a lot of people will see, if they go to an art gallery or something, they will see, or they go to a theatre, they'll see in the programme all the thanks to the private donors, but they don't see the description of the public money that's gone in, and that is a well-kept secret. I think we've got to explain the impact. We've got to tell people about what's put in, but also we've got to make sure that we extend the opportunities to everyone, because nobody is going to think it's a fair deal for the public if something is terribly good but it's for everybody else. It's terribly good but it's only for London.
Let me make one thing perfectly clear from the outset. There is of course no government funding for the arts in this country. There is only taxpayer subsidy of the arts, because there is no such thing as government money, there's only taxpayers' money. And when politicians are seizing our hard-earned cash, the responsibility that they have to ensure it's spent wisely and fairly and in a way that individuals, families and communities could not have done themselves is very, very awesome. There is clearly something of a gulf between the views of YouGov's opinion formers, as you surveyed, and the general public. And several statistics in your presentation particularly struck me. Firstly, that 1 in 4 opinion formers want taxpayer subsidy of the arts protected from any cuts whatsoever. That's against barely 1 in 10 of the general public. And to make the case for cutting spending, you've got to be able to show that money is being spent wastefully or unnecessarily. And in the field of arts, we are not short of examples of such waste. £500,000 spent on Nowhere Island, a small Arctic island which was dragged from the Arctic Circle down to the waters off the south coast of England, where it was towed around by a barge before being broken up. Now, squandering taxpayers' money on such nonsense is irresponsible in the extreme. And if these projects were genuinely worthwhile, then individuals or companies would have come forward to fund them. And if no such funding were available from private sources, you have to question their merit in the first place. Isn't it primarily the duty of those who consume the arts to support them themselves, rather than fleece the unwitting taxpayer who may not have a penchant for opera, ballet or new age art, especially when times are so tough?
Let me say that it's very healthy we should have the Taxpayers Alliance questioning whether spending is done in the proper way. But let me also say that the Arts Council will always take risks, and there will always be projects that you can take the mickey out of, and sometimes they won't come off, because that's what taking risks is about. Today's risk is tomorrow's mainstream, and I've always thought that's one of the reasons for public money. It's risks, artistic risks are taken that wouldn't be taken otherwise. If you really are scrutinising public expenditure, and that is something you really wish to do seriously, then I suggest you try not to miss the wood for the trees, because arts expenditure is less than 0.5% of the whole government budget. And if you really want to do some proper work on government expenditure, you should be looking at whether we're getting best value for the money we spend on health, welfare, education, defence. So Jonathan, my message to you is get a grip, man, get a grip. What type of organisations are arts organisations? What type of organisations are they? And when they were asked that question, the people in the survey, only 9% of them thought that public arts funding goes to charities. 9% of the people surveyed thought public funding goes to charities, and 50% didn't know what sorts of organisations they were. And I think that's a really, really significant finding, and an incredibly important challenge to all of us in the arts, because we do have to diversify the revenues of arts organisations. That's an absolute imperative, and I don't think it would matter which government was in power. They might cut by a little less or a bit more, but there would have been cuts whichever government was in power, because that's the situation we're in.
If you look at the Globe, probably is the wrong example. If you look at Blindborn, certainly that's a good example. If you look at Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin, pop music, the explosion in digital effects companies we've got in this country, Hilary Mantel, Sacha Baron Cohen, all hugely successful, all in the arts, none of them has received a penny of subsidy.
I think it's fantastic, bearing in mind how patchy political and public commitment statements are about the importance of the arts in society. I think it's fantastic that many members of the public, both the opinion formers and the ordinary public, if you like, have defined widening access to the arts and a rich cultural life as being a critical reason for funding. I think that's absolutely progress. I think we should guard against the idea that philanthropy is somehow an attack on public funding. It shouldn't be seen as that. We have to preserve public funding, but also encourage philanthropy. And so we've got to remember that this public funding is not just so that we can survive, it's so that we can keep on pushing the membrane of what a tolerant and civilised society is for. So I don't think the taxpayers feel that taxation should be about just their daily life. It's about the country they want to live in. And if that many of the taxpayers feel that arts is a critical part of that country, then we've achieved a great deal.
But we've got to make sure that these organisations don't carry on doing marvellous things, but you can live right next to it and never have any sense that it could ever be for you. And I think that's a real check for every single big organisation.
The danger of having ever higher government spending of taxpayers' money on things actually discourages individuals from giving themselves.
There's quite a lot of evidence. There's quite a lot of evidence of the opposite of that argument, that actually individuals are much more inclined to be philanthropic if the government is also supporting an institution.
If your philosophy is overly dependent on philanthropy, you could be condemning everything outside London. And I think Peter's absolutely right that actually if you show that you've got the backing of the local authority, then it does inspire confidence and show that it's got the base of funding, and therefore when you put your philanthropic giving in, there's a base for it.
I think this holistic idea that Peter referred to has to include social and cultural enterprise. John Sorrell is making a case at the moment for sort of forming a body in order to effectively subsidise that or cross-subsidise that sector. I do think it needs to be joined up with the subsidised arts. But I think those conversations are on the move.
People have said, oh, less than 0.5% of spending goes on the arts, therefore it shouldn't be cut. That is not a reason
That's not what I
not
said,
cut
no.
it. You know, the Ministry of Defence was spending £22 per light bulb recently on light bulbs that should have cost 22p. That's a tiny amount they're spending, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be cutting it and getting a better deal. And dare I say it also, a lot of arts leaders have said, oh, we should protect the arts. Well, a lot of those people have also, dare I say, some probably in this room, saying, opposing all kinds of cuts that are being proposed by the government, whether they be in the arts or whether they be in health or education or transport, whatever area. You know, the economic situation we're in is utterly, utterly dire. We need to have a massive, massive cut to this country's budget. And from the arts world, I'm not hearing many suggestions of how that can be done.